There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
I am delighted to welcome Mpush from Cape Town, born in the Eastern Cape, living in Cape Town, a notorious and noteworthy South African novelist, here for a bite-sized book chat. Mpush, welcome back.
Hello to your listeners. Also, it's wonderful to be back. I promise that I'll be back and I'm here again.
You are here again, and I am just getting started on editing a full-length conversation with Mpush, Bob the Booker and I, about Mpush's second novel, and that will be up probably before this is, but yes, he has carte blanche to come on my channel for any reason whatsoever at any time, so glad to be here. We are here to talk about a rather canonical, important South African memoir by a Black South African writer. The memoir is called The Ochre People by Noni Jabavu, originally published in 1963, and you have recently read it and done a fabulous review, and there is the lovely cover. So please tell us about this book, Mpush.
Oh, I'm so glad that we're going to be talking about this book. Noni Jabavu is one of the first Black writers in South Africa. And as you said, but the book was initially published in 1963. She published two books, actually, that I know about. Sadly enough, the first one, I didn't really connect into it that much. And I was a little bit worried. And for a long time, I kept postponing reading this one because I thought that I might have the issues with it. But the first one was called, if I can just quickly tell you, was called Drawn in Color. And she was writing about her travels around South Africa, not just South Africa, in Africa generally, Kenya, Botswana, and all that stuff. It is quite poignant because she wrote it because she came back. She was living in London by then. She had gone to London when she was 13 or 14, I think. Perhaps I should start by her history. Noni Jabavu, and I think her English name was Helen, comes from a long line of elite first educated Black people in South Africa. Her grandfather was John Tengo Jabavu, and he used to edit newspapers that were published by the Lovedale Press, which was the missionaries. And then when he had issues with the missionaries because the missionaries were censoring their opinions as Black people, he founded another popular first Xhosa newspaper that was called Imvozabantu, which means basically people's opinions. And then AmaXhosa, when they refer to themselves as Abantu, which means by people, basically. So he was the first person actually to be an editor and the founding member of a Black newspaper. So you will understand when I say, but he was among the first elite educated in the Eastern Cape. Noni's father was John Esbon. It was called Don. He himself became a linguist, and he was proficient in Latin and in about 4 Black languages, which includes Xhosa, Zulu, and Sotho. Around about the time that he was studying, his father, which is John, was part of the people that founded the most notorious and popular today university that used to educate Black people, called Forte. Mandela himself went there, Mugabe went there, all of them, any Black person that needed to go to university then used to go to Forte. So Noni's father was actually a lecturer of linguistics there. So Noni is born into this prestigious family that is well educated. So it is understandable that she speaks in a kind of, how can I say it? I don't want to say condescending way, but it is because she felt herself above the Xhosa uneducated people, which often she called Kephas like other English people. And sometimes she called them pagans because they were not converted to Christianity. So as a Black person at this age, those things kind of grate in you. But then I got
Don't
used
age
to it.
well.
Yes, I had to just get over myself and just read what she was writing. And she's a beautiful writer. And then because even in England, she was one of the first editors of famous journals, English journals. And she married into the famous rich Cadbury family, the Irish family. So her husband came from there. So they founded these journals, and then she was an editor. She's very fluent. She is a very good writer. Something which is rare on perhaps writers that English is not their home language. That you find in her writing is the how can I say, is the confidence, the easy fluency in which you can see her sentences are not labored, and then she flows when she writes, and she thinks the way she thinks is more to me like anthropologically on this book in particular, and the Ochre book, because she's much more interested in trying to find out what Amaxhosa believe, what their language originates from, and their proverbs and their customs. You understand? She came back from England, I think, after her firstborn was born, and then she came home. And then you can see when she's at home, she's looking at home without distant detachment that you kind of find in immigrants. Incidentally, they always find that they are no longer part of this community in a way, but then yet they find that this is their people. There's nothing they like their blood of their blood. And so she writes with that beautiful sense of detachment. And yeah, I really like this book.
And you wrote a sweeping, expansive review, which will be linked in the show notes. It sounds like some of the preoccupations that she explores are historical and linguistic, cultural.
Yeah.
Does she touch on much of the political stuff, the anti-apartheid stuff in this memoir?
Oh yeah, you must remember that when she's writing, then she's writing at a time that the apartheid government was actually taking power, because every time she mentions something, she mentioned how her father and her friends were talking about Verwoerd. Remember, Verwoerd was the architect of apartheid. And then Verwoerd was passing all these laws that were segregating against the Black people. And they were the ones who were directly affected by these laws, because you must remember, under the Smuts government, there was a little bit of a leeway for an educated Black person to be part of the political system. But now Verwoerd was doing away with all of that, and he was establishing laws that segregate, because even in their towns where they used to stay was all of a sudden being demarcated that only white people can stay here. So you must go and stay with other Blacks and all that. So she talks about that. Another thing she talks about when she visits Johannesburg, she visits her aunt in Johannesburg. She talks about, I don't know if you know about the Sophia Towns removals. And then she went there at a particular time that they were happening. And I appreciated a lot that first count experience, because I'm also writing a biography of Bloke Modisane, who was affected by those things. And in his autobiography, he wrote an autobiography that is called Blame Me on History. And it was all about, Blame Me on History. And it was all about the removals of Sophia Town. So I appreciated Noni's first count of all of this. When you read this book, you see how the Black educated elites were actually connected. And as I said, this book is almost a journal of first Black this, first Black this. So, but she does it in a human way, because she sees, she gives us the lifeblood behind it, the relationships behind it, because they were cousins, first and distant, and then she talks about all those things.
I'm going to ask, my last question is maybe not fair for me to ask you, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And that is, for somebody who is not South African and is not immersed in the culture and the history that she's writing about, do you think they should start with this book, or is there another book, not by her, but probably, but another book that they should read before they get to this memoir?
Oh, I think especially if you are a person who reads a lot of history, this book will give you a gentle introduction on how the Xhosa people were invaded into a crisis by the British. And also, it gives you the life and blood of it, not just the facts about the wars. And then she lets you know, like, for instance, but when they took this land, what happened behind to the Xhosas. And you find that the Xhosas have no place to take for their cattle to eat. You understand? And then they end up sometimes even fighting among each other. So she talks about the kings that were killed around the frontier wars, and she refers a lot about on that. And then she takes you gently on how, like, basically, it's something I personally aspire to make people understand why we are in this situation now, where it started. And then, but she doesn't go into depth on it, which is why I'm saying, but if you are a history student or just a history lover, it's probably, if you want to know about the culture, the language, the traditions, and the history of amaXhosa after they were colonized, or before actually even they were colonized. Because another thing I love about her, it's calling the places, the mountains, the rivers, the names by their original names, not the names that were changed by the English to suit them. So I love that, because it gives you a living history of it. And then I'll give you an example. There is a river in East London that is called Nahon. It's one of the biggest rivers. And then I always ask myself, what is the meaning of Nahon? It's just meaningless and all that stuff. And then now, when you understand, Noni tells you that, oh, okay, this area, this river was actually called Nahoni. And then because the English couldn't click, so they called it Nahon. And then all of a sudden, it makes sense to you, the meaning of it and all those things. So that's why I'm saying, but it's kind of a very important book, especially if you are interested in the history of the Eastern Cape.
Your enthusiasm is contagious, it's infectious, and we have not done this book justice in such a short chat, but I'm going to, like I say, I'm going to link to Mpush's review in the show notes. And Mpush, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sarah Hope from the Santa Cruz area of California is back with us. And oh my God, am I dying to talk to her about this book. Sarah Hope, welcome back.
Thank you. I am glad to be back.
I said this off camera. I'm going to say it on camera. You're looking pretty in pink today.
Thank you. I'll take any compliment I can get right now.
So we're going to talk about a novel by an Asian American novelist and poet. It's set or mostly set, maybe completely set in Mongolia. It's called When I'm Gone, Look for Me in the East, a title that I just love. And the author is Quan, who is, I found out, a female just recently. So take it away. Tell us about this book. It sounds fascinating.
Well, what I want to say first is when I was trying to think what categories does it fit into, I came up with road trip and quest. And that's it's the most unexpected road trip ever. The main character who narrates almost all of the book is a Buddhist monk. His brother was recognized as the reincarnation of a lama, and the two of them were brought together to live in this monastery. And they're both still quite young. His brother left. His brother got fed up with the whole thing and left. And the other young man is still living in the monastery, still taking things very seriously, still really contemplating the nature of the all and his place in it. And the fellow who's still in the monastery, I should say names, Chulum, who's the one who's still in the monastery, and Moon, who's the one who's out of the monastery. Chulum has been told that he's going to be sent on a journey with some other monks to try to find the reincarnation of a lama. So he's going to be on the searching end of the way his brother was found, and him by extension. They've asked him to convince his brother to go on the trip with them because he's been living out of the monastery, and there's just knowledge he's going to have that the monks who've been living their whole lives there won't have. It's Chulum, who's still a monk, Moon, who is not, two other Buddhist monks from other parts of the country, and a Buddhist nun. And they're in a Jeep-like vehicle, and they start out in a city, but they very quickly get into the middle of nowhere, driving across vast tracts of sand or dirt, moving from one remote village to another. They have a list of 3 children they're supposed to meet and get to know. And then when they're back, the monk who's in charge of the whole expedition is going to contemplate whether any of them are the person they're looking for or not.
What a fabulous array of characters to explore so many themes. I mean, the ex-monk, and if I understand from the synopsis, it's very recently that he has kind of renounced all of that.
Yeah.
And so introducing a vein of skepticism, if not secular, kind of take
He's gotten very secular very fast.
Oh my God, it's incredible.
It's wonderful. And the young monk who narrates it all is really interesting because he, as anyone would, I think, who's still relatively young and living in a monastery or something, he sort of moves back and forth between what we think of as religious contemplation that is serious and profound and really interesting to follow along with, and then these ordinary jealousies or desires that pop up. And so he's battling with himself against those at the same time that he keeps trying to find the all.
So I am not comforted, but I am encouraged to read it because of the former monk, so that I know that I'm not getting myself into a book where I have to experience this story on a spiritual level. That there's a secular readings are possible.
Secular readings are very possible. When I say the all, that's the term I'm using. I just was about to say the all is not a term Quan uses, but it's the best word I have in my limited vocabulary for that kind of continually contemplative life.
I loved the part in your review where you said that this is a book meant to be read slowly.
It is very much, I mean, it's, the Jeep gets trapped in the sand and they have to walk miles and miles and miles and miles for hours and hours. And they finally, eventually they get what they need. They walk back for miles and miles and miles and miles. They get the Jeep going. There's nothing happens quickly. And in a lot of novels, that would be really frustrating. But given Chaloem's sort of ruminative nature, it works really well because it gives him all this time to do the kind of thinking he does.
A character-driven novel, sounds like.
Yes, a bit of a narrative arc, but not much of one. We're looking for someone and we're visiting kids.
Sounds so much like my kind of book. And it's all first-person narrative?
There are smaller sections that are written in third person, but basically they're from the viewpoint of some of the other people on this journey. But Chaloem's really the dominant voice.
This is the first person voice. Oh my God. So I didn't really know Quan. Every time I saw that name, I would think they're giving the Asian naming order, and we would say Barry Quan, but no, this is Quan Barry, and she is of, I believe, Vietnamese descent, but was born in the States. Certainly she's an English prof in the States. What else did you know about her, including, have you read any of her other stuff?
I confess to knowing absolutely nothing else about her other than that in taking the time to read the afterword, she spent a long time on this novel, worked with a lot of Buddhist practitioners, particularly those who had some knowledge of what Buddhist practice is like in Mongolia. The way she wrote about those people was deeply respectful. It's a novel where she's trying to invite the world into something that most of the world has absolutely no sense of. And as someone who's not completely an insider of that world, she worked really hard to make sure she was doing it justice.
And typically when that works, it feels like it's effortless when you read it, but that's how you can know how much work was put into it.
Yeah, it's deceptive.
So not heavy-handed, not info dumpy.
No info dummy stuff. It's not heavy-handed. One of the other reviewers talked about how there were these moments that would really confound some Western readers. For example, that many of these monks have cell phones or iPads, and and that's part of how they stay in touch with each other across these distances. And so things like technology that we think of as being city, Western, urbanized technology is there in basically the outback of Mongolia in Buddhist monasteries.
Just published at the end of February.
Let me peek at my notes for 1 minute in case there's anything really important that I left out.
And while you're doing that, let me correct what I said, because I just noticed on Quan Berry's bio on Goodreads, she was born in Saigon, raised in Boston, raised in Boston's North Shore.
Okay, so I just want to emphasize what a wonderful road trip book this is, and how it fits into that genre when it completely blows the genre open at the same time. And I think when you were saying why you would like reading this, that the tensions between the religious and the secular, but they're not the kind of tensions made out of hate that we're used to in a lot of religious conflict in this country. They're more sort of tensions of where people's hearts are, but where they're still very much deeply respecting one another.
Just sounds wonderful. Sarah Hope, thank you so much.
Yes.
Olivia from Auckland is back. Hello, Olivia.
Hi, Sean.
You're looking so summery. You'd think it was summer there or something.
Yeah, weird thing about the Southern Hemisphere. It's hot here while it's cold in the north.
Yeah, and you kind of hurt my feelings because I thought you got all dressed up. You look like you're going off to a cocktail party, but you said it's not just for me. It's just
it is for you, Sean.
Olivia has recently read a book that I've had my eye on for several months. Have ordered a copy that is they're back ordered or something on blackwells.uk. It still hasn't been mailed to me, and Olivia recently read it and absolutely loved it. It is called Greta and Valdin by the Maori writer in New Zealand, Rebecca K. Reilly, and it's a queer book.
It is a queer book. It's a very queer book. I think there's more queer relationships in it than there are straight relationships. So it's really interesting.
How wonderful. Please tell us about it.
So I really love this book. I'm in 2 book clubs, and I read it with both book clubs. Both book clubs separately picked it because it's been everywhere in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Aotearoa is the Māori name for New Zealand. So
that's right. I've never heard it pronounced, but I now recognize it. Yep.
Yeah, it's been everywhere because one, it's wonderful, it's warm, it's funny, but it's also nominated for the New Zealand Book Awards, and it made the long list for the Book Awards. And I hope that it will win because I think it's wonderful. And so I think it's had a bit of hype, it's had some good marketing, and rightly so because it's very funny and fantastic.
Wonderful. So what's the opening premise?
The stories are based around the titular characters Greta and Valdin, who are brother and sister, and they're both queer. So Greta is bisexual. I think she sort of doesn't really adhere to any labels, but she's had lots of relationships with women and some with men. And then her brother Valdin is gay, and they are both just navigating life as young adults in Auckland. The Māori name for Auckland is Tamaki Makaurau, and that's what's used often in the book, Tamaki Makaurau. So they are living in the city. They're living a really cosmopolitan lifestyle. Greta is going to university, and she is struggling because she has an unrequited love with someone at the university. And Valdin is also suffering because his longtime boyfriend or partner has left New Zealand and moved back overseas. So he is pining a little bit. That makes it sound like the book is kind of a romantic novel, and it is a little bit, but it's so much more than that. It's really a book about identity, so queer identity, what that means in today's world, but also very specifically in New Zealand, what that means. It's also about cultural identity. So both of the main characters have, their dad is Russian, their mother is Māori, which is the indigenous people in New Zealand, and they also have Catalonian family members. So they're very much a diverse family, and it's interesting because the two main characters, Greta and Valdin, what you get from the book is that they present as white. So they're kind of white passing, but they are very much interested in connecting with their Māori identity and interested in doing that as modern young people. So it deals with a lot.
Getting a little bit of a whiff of Sally Rooney, would that be?
That's so interesting that you say that, because my local bookstore pitched it as Sally Rooney with quotation marks. So Sally Rooney is famous for really observational modern life novels, but for not having quotation marks, and this has quotation marks. And as soon as I saw that description,
I get it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on quotation marks? I'm a big fan of no quotation marks, actually.
I don't mind no quotation marks. I think it really immerses you in the character's consciousness.
And I can hardly think of any one time where I was confused about what is this direct speech or indirect? Like, what's going on here? No, it's very clear usually. I think it's almost to the point of thinking that quotation marks are a little bit childish,
redundant.
What's the tone of this novel?
The tone of this novel is wonderful. It's very, very funny, and it's really smart. It's quite a New Zealand style of humor, so quite dry, quite sarcastic. There's the story is very much centered in family. So obviously the brother and sister are the main characters, but you really meet the extended family. And because it's very much centered in family, there's lots of ribbing and jokes that only families can make amongst themselves. The characters know each other so well. They know each other's flaws. They know what will hurt, what will get under someone's skin. And it's the first book that I can remember laughing out loud in.
Oh.
So maybe since I was a kid. It was actually funny. I was sitting in bed, literally laughing, lolling out loud, and my partner's going, "What are you reading?" But it was such a warm, funny book, but it was also serious at the same time. The jokes were, I think in my review, I wrote that it felt like a really smart stand-up comedy. And I think that best described the way I felt when I was reading it. You know, when you watch a really good stand-up comedy and it's really smart, but it's also clever, and it makes you feel like, oh, that is true. You've really just commented on something that is really resonates in my life. It's something that I see every day that I hadn't objectively thought about, but you've pointed out, and it's funny, and it's also sad, and it's also important. It hits the sweet spot of being funny and really intelligent.
Sounds fantastic. So it is set in your, I don't know if it's your hometown, but where you live, Auckland. And if you can pronounce the Maori version of the city name again.
Yes, Tamaki Makaurau.
And that you were really impressed with how vividly it captured Auckland. Can you, for people that are interested in it that may miss stuff, what's one thing that you loved about it that you would like to bring to the attention of somebody who is maybe not from New Zealand to pay attention?
I think that I've read a reasonable amount of fiction set in New Zealand, and fiction set in New Zealand is often set in these really remote, rugged landscapes because that's what we're known for overseas. I think that's what tourists come here for. They come for wild West Coast beaches. They come for skydiving and bungee jumping and sailing and really wild landscape. And we definitely have that. But we also have cities that look like modern cosmopolitan cities with skyscrapers, not as many as big cities like New York and London, but sprawling suburbs with old colonial houses, with modern ugly things, with little, we have areas that are not so nice, and it really just felt like the modern city that I knew. I think I read a review, or maybe it was an interview with the author Rebecca K. Reilly, where she said she wanted it to feel like Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, but just a little bit sexier. And I think that that's true because the characters are living in the city and it's quite vibrant. And I'm not quite sure that Auckland is quite as vibrant as it's depicted in here, but it felt really authentic.
Olivia, thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was really fun.
This is a special delight. Elisabeth of the fabulous BookTube channel, Bookends and Books, is joining us from Ottawa, Canada. Hello, Elisabeth.
Hi, Sean.
What a treat to meet you on, I was going to say on the radio, but we're not on the radio, on Zoom. How are you doing?
Yes, Very good. Thank you. Spring is finally coming to town, so that's great.
That's awesome. And it's very early there, and you look like spring. You look very refreshed and full of vim and vinegar. So good for you.
It's because I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Now, first question. What's the story with the title of your channel? What is a bouquin?
A bouquin is a way of saying book in French. So I simply wanted to reflect my French-Canadian origins. And so basically the title of my channel is Books and Books.
So is it French-Canadian French or French-French? Bouquin?
It's French-French. It's French-French, but at the origin, I think it was probably to mock the English word. Like it was a bit of a derogatory word to say book. So go back to your bouquin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Elisabeth has a fabulous channel and she does a lot of interesting things over there. And I would like to give Elisabeth a minute or two or however long she would like to shout out her own channel. And as I warned her offline, if she's too modest, I will have to do an intervention.
Well, thank you. My channel is a simple channel. I just prop the phone against the window ledge and I talk about books. I do book reviews, wrap-ups, tags, readathons. I love readathons. I'm a judge for the BookTube Prize, the nonfiction division. I talk about nonfiction, about classics, about bits of mysteries, bits of romance, and all types of books.
And it's coming up. We're on April 1st. I don't know if it's April 1st where you are, but it is where I am.
It is.
What's the next big bookathon, readathon you're going to be?
For me, the next one is going to be a judge for the BookTube Prize for the second round in the nonfiction division.
You were not an official judge for the round that ends in a few hours, but one of the books that you read just as kind of a shadow judge is one we're going to talk about today. And there's no embargo because you weren't a judge, and this is going to go up long after the fact. So timing is worked out. And that is a work of I would say Black history, Black American history, all that she carried, the journey of Ashley Sack, a Black family keepsake by Tiya Miles, which just came out in June of last year. I'd heard a little bit about it. It was already on my radar. In fact, I think I've already got it lined up on my Kindle. Haven't read it. Please take it away. Tell us about this book.
Well, this book is a work of nonfiction. It's about an object that is now at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. So it's a sack, a cloth bag that was used to carry corn or animal feed or something like that. And it's stained, it's patched, it has been used. And on it, there's a message that is extremely moving, and that was embroidered by a descendant of the original owner, I guess, of the sack. And it says, I'm going to read it to you. My great-grandmother Rose, mother of Ashley, gave her this sack when she was sold at age 9 in South Carolina. It had a tattered dress, 3 handfuls of pecans, a braid of Rose's hair, told her it'd be filled with my love always. She never saw her again. Ashley is my grandmother, and it's signed Ruth Middleton, 1921.
That is beautiful, very, very moving. And so then Tiya Miles, she's a historian.
Yes, she's a historian. She teaches in universities in the United States. Yeah.
What kind of a book did she make about this sack?
Yeah. Well, she wanted to know what was the history behind that story. So she decided to look in the archives to try to find who Ruth and Ashley were. Rose and Ashley, I should say. Ruth is the great-granddaughter of Rose. And then she wanted to know why these objects were put in the sack. Why this? And that is the story that she tells. Of course, slavery being what it was, there's limits to what information you can find about specific people. So she doesn't really find for sure who Rose and Ashley were. That's the sad thing. We can never know for sure. There are no birth registries. They are not on the census. They basically did not exist as human beings at the time. So she looks in the archives to try to find a document where there would be together a slave named Rose and another one named Ashley, who would correspond approximately to the age of the people in this story. And she manages to find one such document. So she starts from the hypothesis that this could be the Rose and Ashley of this sack. And from there, she starts to tell the story of what could have been the life of these 2 slaves.
That's fascinating. I just am looking at your review, and you quote from the introduction where Miles writes that she'll be stretching historical documents, bending time, and imagining alternative realities into and alongside archival fissures.
Yes.
Now, there's a lot of academic writing that makes my skin crawl, but that's quite beautiful.
It is beautiful. At first, I thought it was a bit scary. A work of history full of imagination. What is that? But it turns out it's very reasonable. It's just that there are holes in the archives. So you have to figure out a way to know what was in these holes. And it's not because we don't have any documents specifically naming Rose and Ashley that Rose and Ashley did not exist. So that is where the alternative is used. It's either this or that. Maybe Rose was a slave working in the city, or maybe she was working in the countryside. So from there, you can imagine what their lives were depending on where they were living. So that there's no guarantee, there's no certainty, but there is a pretty good sense of what their lives were.
And how about the great-granddaughter, Ruth? Was she able to find any of her descendants or relatives that were on
apparently, she doesn't have any descendants. She had a daughter who would have died in the 1980s. The sack was not found. It was not a family heirloom that was brought to a museum. It was found in a fabric bin by someone who was just rummaging for pieces of fabric.
Wow.
Yeah, and that person bought it. Pieces of fabric are bought by the weight. So she bought like a pound or two of fabric, and that wasn't there.
Wow. So this imaginative reconstruction of what might have been the historical record, that ended up really working for you.
Yes, because it covers a wide range of topics that are important for the period. Yeah, Tiya Miles examines like every element of the story. So in the sack, there was a tattered dress. So she examines what was the importance of dress for slaves, the importance of fabric, what they could do with it, with the limited means they had, how could they express their personality and their creativity through the fabric. And she does that also for the braid. What did it mean to have a braid of your mother's hair? And the pecans, why a handful of pecans? What do you do with that?
So, Elisabeth, I was already interested in, and I'm pretty sure I've already got a copy on my Kindle, but boy, have you inflamed my curiosity about the book. So thank you so much.
Great.